I don't know how mainstream media is going to get out from under this one. I'm referring to the president's claims that before the election, his offices at Trump Tower, which were essentially were his campaign headquarters, he ran a very lean and mean operation. That his telephones were tapped by people in the government. He says specifically under President Obama's orders. Now, define an order. Again, the president at the time may have been aware of it. We don't know for sure that it was ordered. Kellyanne Conway appeared this morning on Fox and Friends, and she was speaking about this story. Mainstream media doesn't like her, of course, so they try to. Some of the networks won't even have her on the air any longer. But she was saying it's time, if the media really has a job to do, then the media should do it.
I saw the different interviews over the weekend, and as some people left open the possibility that maybe there were departments or agencies or individuals not under their direct purview where this could have taken place. But the president's entire point is
Right.
that the people deserve to know. So why not include in the existing investigations into Russia this aspect, that whether or not this actually happened?
And again, there was a time when you'll hear this all media folks like to pat themselves on the back and say, well, we're different genetically. We love a mystery and we get very curious. Except, of course, when it involves a claim by a Republican president they don't like. The only other explanation is they're so dang lazy. I had neighbors when I was a boy, and they had it was an albino raccoon, and they were raising it as a house pet, and that raccoon slept more than a cat did. Uh, and so we started joking in the neighborhood, all of the kids. When somebody was lazy, we'd say, "You're lazier than a pet coon." And it became sort of a neighborhood running gag. It was a reference to that raccoon that the Stubbs family had that just constantly was snoozing when you'd be over at the house. And I think that media doesn't like to be called lazy, so media's only other reason for not delving into this. Oh, we love a good mystery. Well, yeah, so do a lot of people out there, as if you're somehow special. Well, if you love a good mystery, then check out the fact checkers who'll look into everything else Donald Trump brings up. Where are they this time around? 9 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. A whole slew of executive orders expected from the White House this morning, including the latest travel pause. That's on the way in a few minutes. Media will huff and puff and vent about that for the next several days. In other words, imitating their fellow travelers over in the Democrat Party. Chuck Schumer said yesterday he was going to try to block construction of a border wall. Now, why would you do that? When he at one time, and we have access to all of the old sound bites, for the last decade or most of the last decade, Chucky Schmucky would come out and he'd be on these Sunday morning shows and say, "Yeah, we should build a border wall, and a country without borders is no country at all." And I have a wife, and I know a lot of people out there find it hard to believe that any woman would have an interest. I'm sorry, but as I was saying, now he says he's going to stop it. Well, why? Do you favor drug traffic, crime? Do you favor the dissolution of the United States of America? Why doesn't anyone in media hold his feet to the fire in all of this? Telephone number for reaching us 736-0300. I'm sure you knew that Chuck Schumer was straight, right? I know it might be questionable, but you probably knew that. 736-0300. My email address, bill.colley, that's Colley, at townsquaremedia.com. Bill.colley at townsquaremedia.com. 736-0300. Let's go back to the telephones, and you're up next. You're on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and News Radio 1310.com.
Yeah, hello. They say that there was no warrant issued for this Trump thing. There was no warrant issued for the Whitewater either, so maybe that never happened. And also, I watched Mission Impossible growing up, and at the end of every, or at the beginning of every show, it would give them the instructions and say, if you get caught, the government will disavow any knowledge of you. And on the MacGyver, same deal. This last week, they asked the FBI and the CIA and the Phoenix Foundation if they knew anything about the Phoenix Foundation MacGyver group, and they all disavowed it. They all said, no, we don't know it. And
Well, that's
MacGyver looked at his guys and said that.
that's good entertainment. It's not necessarily how government actually works. Although there are people, and thank you, in government who are designated to fall on a sword in order to protect the boss. And this, I've always found that I had a few opportunities to work for politicians over the years, and it never came about because they value loyalty over, I think, competence. And they somehow think that loyalty means sycophancy. In other words, they want lickspittles. And yes, there are people in politics, there are lickspittles out there who will fall on a sword to protect the Obamas and the Clintons, probably even some in the Trump White House too. Albeit that I think he's been better as a businessman in hiring people who are actually competent versus people who are just fawning all over him all the time. You're up next, and you're on the air on Top Story at 9:12. Go ahead.
Bill, the Russian-Trump relationship is just a media head fake to get Americans to think that is the reason Hillary lost the election. Our side should point out that Arkansas is in the Bible Belt and that President Putin didn't invite Paula Jones into a hotel room and open his pants and expose his penis to her. Putin's wife then didn't demean Paula Jones' character. Hillary and James Trailer Park Trash demeaned Paula Jones. Arkansas and every Bible state touching Arkansas do not respect or like the Clintons. They all voted for Trump. Even the Clintons' home state preferred Trump.
I thank you much for the telephone call. Arkansas, I have friends who live there, and they tell me it really hasn't changed much over the last several decades. The coastal, New York, Massachusetts, California, Oregon, Washington State all have dramatically. But in the center of what we still call flyover country, there has been very, very few changes that we've seen. Look, Andrew McCarthy, the former federal prosecutor, had a piece that I saw over the course of the weekend. Does it always have to be over the course? I guess I could just say over the weekend, couldn't I? And I could save a split second of airtime if I did that. He had a piece where he said, look, can someone actually show any evidence that Russia hacked the election? No, there is no evidence. Now, there is some belief, and there is a large Russian operation in the city of St. Petersburg, where the Russians have for years been looking into they've been able to hack into all sorts of Western government emails. And the Chinese do this as well, where it's espionage not only into governments, but into businesses. So they're trying to get intelligence on what corporations are doing as well. I even saw a photograph of the building where the Russian hackers, they work. But again, all we know that is likely that happened was a moron by the name of John Podesta working on the Clinton campaign used the word password as his password and allowing it to be easily hacked by somebody on the outside, possibly the Russians. And then somehow WikiLeaks got a hold of all of these emails from the Democrat National Committee and the Clinton campaign and published them, embarrassing the Democrats. But if you listen to media and to the DNC and to all of the other echo chambers that they have, they give the impression that the Russians were changing the votes in voting machines. But that nothing like that. There's no such evidence, and it was an impossibility because you would have had to have Russian teams in every precinct and county in America. There just aren't that many Russians available. And so they don't have that evidence. And that's what really is galling them, is that the rest of us are pointing that out. If they had that evidence, they would have released it a long time ago. We have a caller with us. Caller, it's 9:15. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.
Good morning, Bill. The irony of the whole thing you just pointed out. I mean, he's tweeted out this, and they're all screaming up and down, where's the evidence, where's the evidence? But yet we've been accused of Russians doing this and that and everything else under the sun with no evidence. But it's okay when they do it, but not when we do it.
Think about this. A
Here's
friend
the
of
other-
mine
here's the oth-
a friend of mine sent me a note and said, The Democrats claim to have transcripts and the times of all of these calls between Russians or the various people in the Trump campaign. Well, if that is the case, where did they get them? They got them because they were tapping the phones.
Well, I claim to be in the top 10% of income, but I'm not. It doesn't matter what you claim, it's what you've got. The proof is always in the pudding. And the second deal is you don't have to have a warrant to create a wiretap when you got people in your pocket that can do it for you.
Well, they've got a lot of people currently working in government who, their loyalties obviously are still to the Obama machine or even the old Clinton machine. And they're not doing it because they're Americans first. And that's the sad part of all of this. There is, and we have been able to see that develop over organizing for action. The old Obama campaign appendage is still out there, is still meddling within government, is still creating, still bringing these people out to demonstrate in the streets. You know, over the weekend, there were a number of these demonstrations, one outside the White House, where you had, in most cities, they were not huge, but you had hundreds of Trump supporters show up, taking time out of their busy weekends, showing up outside various locations around the country. And what they were doing was showing up waving American flags and supporting their president and his goals. And what happened was all of these, they run around now like they're dressed as ninjas, these black clad, these are the same uh, underhanded people who caused all of that damage at Berkeley, California a few weeks ago. Well, in California, they showed up, in fact, near the Berkeley campus. The Trump backers were there, and then these other people showed up, and the two groups started beating each other with sticks. I'm glad that the Trump people finally have realized that they're going to have to defend themselves against these goons. On the other hand, this thing could get to the point where it gets much more violent than just beating each other over the head with sticks and batons. That's what's frightening about all of this. And OFA, Organizing for Action, the former campaign wing for Barack Obama, is behind that escalation. A couple of weeks ago, I attended the Lincoln Day dinner for the Twin Falls County Republicans, and the state Republican chairman, Steve Yates, said the country has been more divided, and he cited the 1960s. I suppose he's right in that sense. Things were much more violent in the streets than they are now. And in the 1860s, 100 years before that, they were even more violent. And if you go back to the 1760s, the colonial powers were battling here in North America. So there's a history that we have, it seems, every century with all of this. But I don't think we've seen the end of it. I don't think the Democrats are going home anytime soon. And what worries me is if they escalate this and they go on a much bigger burning, bombing, and looting and smashing campaign, that some of the folks on the right are going to say, look, if the government can't control this any longer, we're going to have to do it. And this is where I fear for the left. I probably shouldn't, but I fear for them because there are nearly 400 million firearms in private hands in this country, and they aren't owned by lefty. And that is what could sadly happen in the streets. 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. We're at 31. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. We've got more on liberal exhaustion coming up in a few minutes. Liberalism, I should point out, I've got a couple of clippings unrelated this morning that hint that liberalism is a dying and spent force in this country. We'll get to that in just a moment. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Temperature 30. I'm going to say it's 30, but it's wavering. It has been jumping around over the last few minutes from high 20s to low 30s. But this is about as hot as it's going to get today. We'll try to heat things up here on the program. How's that? Are you a homeowner who's looking to add a little value to your home? I raise that question because if you're a regular listener, you heard us last week speaking with the folks behind Western Visions, Inc. And actually, we got to talk to one of the clients of Western Visions, too. They were in the studio with us on Wednesday morning, just after the 9 o'clock news. A remodel or addition to your current home can be a fantastic way to add value to your lifestyle without going through the life disturbance of selling, buying, and moving. But that change, that renovation, that addition will add value to your current property, which means in the long run, then your equity grows with that. Western Visions Inc. does custom designs, and they specialize in residential remodel, additions, kitchen and bath renovations, as well as whole home redesign and retrofit. And I do want to point out it combines innovative cutting edge design concepts with the very latest in materials. LED lighting is a good example. We talked about that technology and building technique to deliver state of the art finished product on time and on budget. And they'll use floor plan creativity, next generation lighting schemes, as we've mentioned, components and design element selections. Western Vision's concepts crush the average and place your project at the forefront of your community's renovation curve. And I do want to point out, if you'd like to see some of the work and get more details, go to the website western-visions.com. That's western-visions.com. And Western Visions Inc. has an office right here in Twin Falls, Idaho. It's 9:24 now. I've got a couple of clippings here that I just want to mention. A woman writing at The Atlantic this morning, happened to see this about 5:30 as I was sitting at my desk sipping a cup of coffee, says that Donald Trump's advantage may last a long time, even though Democrats claim demography is on their side. Now, last week I saw a writer say even if Trump were gone, Trumpism, as it's called, will stay here. And she seconds this as well. She's taking, though, a more dystopian, that is, darker view as to why. She claims it's because Americans aren't joiners anymore. We don't volunteer as much. We don't go to church as much. She hasn't been to this community, obviously. Can't find a seat here. It's so crowded. But she says that because Americans, she claims especially white Americans, since we're still the dominant ethnicity in this country, she says Caucasians have become much more inward looking. And because of that, of course, this is the liberal argument, we fear everybody else, therefore we support Donald Trump out of fear. That's the argument from the left. But it still says, and ultimately, that white America is going to remain for a long, long time the dominant voting bloc in this country, and white America, she says, overwhelmingly supports Donald Trump. Over at the Wall Street Journal, Shelby Steele, who is not a white American, we should point out, the liberals like to say a person of color. He's a black man, and he's a historian, works at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University. Professor Steele has a commentary in the Wall Street Journal today. The headline is "The Exhaustion of American Liberalism." Unlike the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, when protesters wore their Sunday best and carried themselves with heroic dignity, today's liberal marches are marked by incoherence and downright lunacy. Hats designed to evoke sexual organs, poems that scream in anger yet have no point to make, and an hysterical anti-Americanism. America, he writes, since the 60s has lived through what might be called an age of white guilt. We may still be in this age, but the Trump election suggests an exhaustion with the idea of white guilt and with the drama of culpability, innocence, and correctness in which it mires us. In other words, white America no longer is going to be cowed by a media and an academia and an entertainment industry that tells it is to blame for all of the social ills that we have. White Americans who have traditionally worked very hard, tried to pay their bills on time, tried to create a better life for their children, are sick of being told, you're to blame. And he's coming at this from the right side of history, where the writer at The Atlantic is coming from the left side of history, but both are reaching the same conclusion. What we saw happen in last year's election is going to be with us for a long time to come. You know, that's that comment about exhaustion. We're sick of hearing it. Everybody out there, whenever I hear people say, well, you wouldn't want to be born and raised a black person in this country, I realize that, Chris Rock made a great statement one time. He was doing a concert and he said to the audience, he said, none of you would trade places with me and I'm rich. And he may have a point there. On the other hand, to sit here and say this whole notion of white privilege, that you get away with something because you're white, is a bunch of baloney. If you're speeding and you're doing 70 in a 35 mile per hour zone, you're going to get pulled over no matter what color you are. It's not like the police officer comes up and says, oh, I see you're white. Well, have a good day out there and please move along. It doesn't happen. If a white guy goes into a bank and says, this is a stick up, and as he's running down the street afterwards, the police don't just say, hey, Whitey, good to see you made a withdrawal, and let you go. No, you're going to get arrested. You don't catch a break because of the color of your skin. If you're not paying your rent, it's not like somebody's going to come along and say, well, I'll tell you what, since you're white, we'll forget about it. I've never seen any of those things happen in my life. The fact of the matter is the majority is still paying most of the taxes in this country, and the majority happens to be Caucasian. And to sit here and blame them and say they're not doing enough for everyone else when they're struggling to pay the rent, the mortgage, and scratching their heads in worry trying to figure out how they're going to send kids to college, then to sit there and keep blaming them for everything that ails you in your own community when you should be pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, that's where liberalism has exhausted itself, because it's exhausted the people it was blaming. And now they're pushing back. Short break. It's 9:30. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. 30, and I don't think it's going to get much warmer today. We're looking for maybe some snow this afternoon and possibility of a mix of snow and rain tomorrow. Weather brought to you by Mountain Home Auto Ranch. I'd like to point out, too, as well, we should see temperatures in the mid, maybe even upper 50s before the week is over.